Hey guys, it's Chris Truitt from The Reluctant Somm. We're really excited about Season 3. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. Just wanted to give another little note that if you like what we're doing and you want to show us some support, reviews, likes, shares, word of mouth, all of these things really help us. We'll also be creating a newsletter this year that focuses on some of our favorite restaurants, favorite wine lists, favorite places to eat, as well as just some really cool people in the industry, as well as some other insights into what's going on in our field of profession. I also wanted to let you know that on that is where we'll be updating everybody on all of our pop-ups and any collaboration events or anything that we're doing. So if you want to keep track of us, that's the best way. Also, if you're not already following us on Instagram, you can follow us at Reluctant Somm on Instagram and keep up with us. Give us likes. Cheers.
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 Thank you.
Dan, welcome to the podcast. Of course, I spill right away. Dan, I'm excited to have you here. I am incredibly appreciative of your willingness to come on and do the podcast, and I'm excited to talk about the wines. Excited to talk about you as a person, because I think that like we were just talking about before the podcast, we need more content. We need more people talking about wine. We need more people making wine like fun, and I think that's something that you've done really well. And you're kind of constantly pushing the envelope, and there's a couple things I wrote down that I think are like really fascinating. So I would love to dive into those further into the podcast. But, just to kick things off, if you could introduce yourself and kind of give us a story of your life in wine. Or before also, I think is important to highlight. Sure.
No, for sure. Thank you for having me. My story of wine goes back now, as I'm getting older, it goes back 20 plus years. And it's been great because the one thing I always think about myself, and this is really key to the story of who I am and how I conduct business, is that I'm a wine drinker first and a winemaker second. Mm-hmm. I do not. I feel just like everyone who sits at a table in a fancy restaurant, very intimidated with wine. Mm-hmm. Even to this day, I'm intimidated by wine. So for me, it's always been, how do I distill it? How do I make it simple? How do I, connect with someone with regards to it without getting into the technical details? But if you want to talk about pH and soil content and all that other great shit that's in our industry, I can go there too from a geek perspective. But the reality of it is no one wakes up in the morning thinking about wine except for professionals and people in the trade. So my life has been about waking up and making wine easier and fun. And that to me was, as I was growing up in New York City in the publishing industry and reading about wine and wineries and winemakers and historical vignerons from Europe, I was intrigued by their stories. I was living vicariously through their stories. And when I was fortunate enough to be able to taste their wines, it was my connection to them was through the story. Mm-hmm. So that's where I started in the late 90s, early 2000s in New York City, sitting at, dining room tables at fancy restaurants with a corporate card, buying wines that I could not afford on my own, drinking wines, not understanding them, but remembering I've read, that chapter in Robert Parker's Wine Bible or Jay McInerney's articles from Better Homes and Gardens back in the day,
or something, yeah.
And like all the rare and unique spaces where you can find wine writing at that time, because it wasn't super prevalent. Mm-hmm. You had to seek it out, and that got me into wine and got me in a big way. It gave me the bug. It was funny when I chose to leave my career in New York City in publishing after 10 years and moved to Italy to work on a vineyard. My mother and my brother sat me down and was like, your father's an alcoholic, right? He's a classic, old school 1950s, 60s wino. Mm-hmm. We're not comfortable with this. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, no, it's different. Let me tell you why wine is different. And that was my first realization of like how distant people were with wine and how I can do the best in the industry by bringing people closer. And so I went to live and work in a vineyard in Sicily for a year. Got back to America, didn't know what jobs were available to me in New York City from a wine sales and marketing perspective. I had an MBA. I had 10 years of corporate work. I was in publishing. I had written before. I had done finance, all the things. So I continued my year-long wine education stage in California, landed in Sonoma County, Russian River Valley. That ended up, triggering a job in Napa Valley at Larkmead in January 2007. And then Massican started a couple years later because I was, just curious about how the wine industry worked from an economic model, from a marketing model, from a production standpoint. I wanted to know everything about the cost of goods. And so I built business plans, wrote business plans, ripped them up, tore them up, started over again, and finally found one with Massican in 2009 that I didn't believe at the time was what the potential it has today in 2009. I wanted just to make wines that I wanted to drink that reminded me of the wines I drank in Italy. And 16 years later, I'm sitting here, and just, doing my best to be an advocate for wine drinking and alcohol beverage consumption. Yeah. Everyone who knows me knows I love a good martini. And that's just been my, my kind of, operational day-to-day life is just make wine and talk about it. Drink it too.
I love it. It's so cool to see kind of like this voracious thirst for knowledge from the beginning, right? And in these different fields. And it's also fascinating to hear about like your family dynamic with wine. And I think, America, this is kind of a problem. I don't want to speak in ultimates, right? But I think that's kind of one of the things with American culture is, drinking is drinking. But in European culture, drinking wine with a meal is just commonplace. And so it's fascinating to hear kind of the family push back a little bit and that little bit of hesitation to kind of let you launch yourself into that world. When you were working at Times and you were saying that you were getting to meet people and talk about wine, were you doing, I tried to find articles, but I, of course, was waiting till the last minute and couldn't find any articles. Did you get to meet winemakers and things through that role, or just mostly tasting wine at restaurants was kind of the experience?
Exactly. I did, as a consumer, go to the Wine Spectator October event every year, which is a killer event for any consumer who has the extra $500 to pay for a tasting for 4 hours with all the great wines of the world. So that was, I met him on the other side of the table as a consumer. Most of my experiences in restaurants was, scoping a restaurant out before I went to it with my clients or friends, looking at the wine lists in person because it wasn't online at the time, and kind of writing notes, taking it away, going back, doing some research, reading magazines, reading books, finding out more about, Joseph Phelps or Heidi Barrett or Helen Turley, because I was really during that era drinking California in the most meaningful way before I started to lean towards Italy and then eventually towards France. And, those are the three kind of highlights of my wine drinking career. And it's just such a intimidating world beyond that it's frustrating for even someone in the industry to not have the ability to kind of feel all of it or touch all of it. But I wanted to focus. So it gave me the opportunity to focus, to learn, and then also to communicate to people the stories, at the table as to why I purchased that wine, and not just because it had, an animal on the label, or it was the most expensive wine on the list, or the cheapest one I could afford. And people were fascinated. People, when you start talking about the history and the people behind a glass of wine and how it got to that table, people are engaged immediately. Because it's not something, again, as I mentioned, no one wakes up in the morning thinking about wine except wine professionals. And that is really important to understand. But that's not just our problem. That's every brand's problem. That's every industry's problem, as you kind of make something to share and to sell to the consumer. So it was really fun to kind of to hold court for that first few minutes and kind of banter with the sommelier or the service director, because at the time there wasn't a lot of sommeliers either, and wine was a lot cheaper then. Yeah. I wish I knew now what I knew then. We all say that, but holy fuck, the wine I could have drank in New York City was just astonishing at that time in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, and at the prices was just, oh my God. Wow. Damn.
Yeah, it was certainly a different world. I mean, I still feel like, I follow a couple people on Instagram and stuff, and I still feel like I'm seeing so many cool things in New York, and everybody's discovering these amazing things coming from Europe. And maybe like deep East Europe, a lot of really fun, interesting things. And then a lot of this natural wine, which is something we were also talking about before the podcast. And it's cool to see people getting excited about that stuff. And then you see it retailing at $25 or $30 a bottle. I'm like, wow, that gives me hope, right? Because living in San Francisco and being so close in proximity to, Napa, there's such a cost prohibitor for so many people to get into, like, say, Napa Cab more specifically. And so it's great to see this, I don't know, depth being added to kind of the industry, and more specifically in California with brands like yours. And we've also had Brian Terrizzi on the podcast, doing things in Paso with a bunch of great Italian wines. And it's great to see people kind of pushing the envelope and still able to make like wines that are fairly affordable. So it's awesome. But yeah, if we all knew now what we knew then, if we all knew then what we know now, I don't even know what I'm saying. No, sorry.
But I just want to expand on a point you just made. The thing that frustrates me about the wine industry is that it's so vast. There's not another industry of product or of creation of things that you can pull out of the ground and make into a finished product that has so much diversity. And instead of celebrating the diversity, we tend to get isolating ourselves on the competition of someone taking our market share. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something that we have to turn that conversation around and celebrate it, because there are more restaurants that any one winery could sell wine to. So let's not be so, let's not stop bickering about this and that and these wines not being acceptable to public market domain, or we don't like them, or they're flawed, or this, that, the other thing. There's just too many people in too many places for people to consume what we provide. We should celebrate the fact that there is a lot of great wine made in this world, and no other product in the world can replicate that that I can think of. I mean, please drop it in the podcast notes if you get there. Make a comment on social, please, and tell me some other industries that do more than what the wine industry does from a pure product basis.
Yeah, and globally too. I mean, immediately when you were saying that, the only thing I could think of, it's something we talk about a lot, is like agave, right? Because these are all different species, but they're all coming from one area, roughly not one area, like Mexico, let's say, one country, and they don't have kind of the reach that wine does. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's funny. I mean, it's something that I think about a lot, and that I used to get like a little bit of flack for sometimes. I go to a restaurant and I'm like making a presentation, and they're like, well, I'm looking for something like this. And I go, I don't have anything like that. But my friend Matthew at Springboard, he's got those wines. And my managers have, not necessarily anyone in particular, but managers in the past have been like, did you just recommend somebody else's wine? I'm like, yeah. Why would you do that? Because he's awesome and those wines fucking rock. Like, why wouldn't I want to like be an asset and be a resource for the restaurant? Like, I'm not here like holding the cards and holding all the information and not sharing anything. Like, if I think the wines are great and I don't have anything for that space, or they don't like my thing that I have for that space, why not help make their life easier? I was hanging out with one of my friends last night, and an average week for him is 65 hours. And that's a restaurant professional nowadays. And we were talking about the consolidation of roles that happened in restaurants after the pandemic. But what didn't happen was a consolidation of pay. They eliminated roles. They added extra responsibilities to restaurant professionals, and there would be maybe a small bump in pay or something like that. But now you're stuck there juggling all these different things, and you don't have enough time, you don't have enough hours. But that was a tangent. I apologize. But
no, but to your point, what you want to do and what your nature is to be a resource, to be trusted, and then as people trust you and they become friends with you as a community, that's when you build your networks. And it's the domino effect of what happens down the line. You make a Napa Valley Cabernet, you grow the grapes, you ferment it, you barrel it, you age it, you bottle it, you age it again. You don't get paid out until down the line to 5 years. So why can't we have relationships and trust in that way and help people in their place that you can support them instead of just being very kind of tight-lipped and conservative and closed-minded with regards to your space. And this industry is just, it's too joyous. It's a glass of fucking wine. We eat great food. We drink great wine together as a community. And I think we still all do that in a lot of ways. But it bothers me to hear about the bickering that goes on in all aspects of the business, from food to beverage.
Yeah. I would love to.
We need to fix it. I mean, we need to fix it. There are inherent problems. Don't get me wrong, but we need as a community to keep turning the wheel to see if we can fix it.
That's one of the Bianca and I have always said in the podcast before. It's like, we're, giving a sales rep a platform to reach people, and we're like, is that creating more competition? And we're like, whatever, who cares? And then we were like, oh, we have people from restaurants in here and they're talking about their program. Like, that's free resources for the competition, right? And then you go like, it's not really competition. Like, I mean, if we can, like you said, there's enough restaurants in this country, in this state. There's more restaurants than there's wineries, right? If one winery owned that restaurant and they had every wine that they had on the menu, like, you would still need more business. You still need to reach outside of that, right? If we're all cutting each other's throat over a BTG placement, then like, it's not sustainable, So, well, great.
All right, we got through the
step
first
back
question.
off the soapbox.
we got through the first question.
I wanted to kind of talk to you and understand a little bit more, I guess, about Larkmead, your time at Larkmead, and if you could go over the timeline a little bit of doing Larkmead and Massican at the same time. And, I can't think off the top of my head that I've had one of the bottles that you worked on at Larkmead, but, stylistically, was there a little bit more of a recipe? All respect to the wines. I love the wines. They're one of my favorite things that Springboard had. And I guess that's maybe why you were at Springboard before. Connecting the dots. But yeah, if you could elaborate on that.
Sure. No, for sure. I had the great good fortune when I moved out to California. I did my first internship at a winery at Dumal. And Andy Smith, the winemaker owner at Dumal, was also the consulting winemaker at Larkmead. And he had asked me to split some time in the 06 vintage between Dumal and Larkmead, do 1 day a week in Napa, 5 or 6 days a week in Sonoma. And it was a big vintage, so we needed all hands on deck in 2006, both sides of the hill. And midway, kind of towards the end of the Dumal harvest, Andy asked me if I'd be willing to stay on. And I said, to do what? I was like, he's like, to be the cellar master at Larkmead. And I was like, okay, I guess. I don't know what that means. I don't, and he kind of hired, he liked my work ethic. He liked my curiosity. He liked my energy. And he thought I was an adult. I was older at the time. I had a 10-year corporate career and I left that. So he trusted me in, giving me the keys and, I'd lock the door. But then he left me there alone I was there as him as a consultant. He wasn't there every day, and I was there alone to kind of do the work. But there was a lot of free time making Cabernet to taste and to kind of so I would barrel taste, and then I would write notes, and I'd barrel taste, and I'd write notes, and I try to educate myself through repetition of what's going on in this barrel, in this block, where it comes from the property. Go out. We were fortunate to be a state. Go out and walk across the street and be like, oh, look at it. The rock content here versus the clay over there versus the sand over there. Let me go back and taste those wines. And so that happened for years. And while that was happening, Larkmead was building its DTC program, hospitality program. So I got to see a lot of it. It was only like 5 or 6 of us in 07 who worked there. And so I would work in the tasting room on a Sunday or a Saturday just because, I was building my friend set. I was building my network and just learning more about the business. So that was also my personal kind of like things that make me happy are writing business plans. It sounds weird. It's like finding an idea, doing the math, finding the audience, constructing a plan, looking at the numbers from a financial perspective. So I started doing that with Cabernet, and I'm like, this really doesn't make sense. And then that's how the whole, after 2 years, 3 years, that's how the whole Massican business plan evolved into a white wine brand, white wine only. It was also looking at the community saying there's not enough. Sauvignon Blanc was on the rise in Napa Valley during that era, but done in a more Chardonnay-like style, heavier, richer barrel ferments. So I was like, let's slide in. I would drive to San Francisco or get off the plane when I was traveling, go to Beyond Vino or go to the Jug Shop or go to K&L and pick up a bunch of Italian white wines, drive them up to Napa Valley because I couldn't buy that stuff in Napa. Maybe at at Bottle Barn, they had a nice selection of European wines, but definitely not Napa. So that was me kind of like exploring the capabilities of Napa Valley during that time to launch Massican. And I did in 09, and I did with, some good fanfare. It was the right time, the right place. It was the New California movement from John Bonet and the San Francisco Chronicle. It was the In Pursuit of Balance movement with Rajat Parr and Jasmine Hirsch. And Massican was lighter, brighter, fresher, low alcohol wines that just fit the moment, the zeitgeist, and started small. And I knew that I had a day job, so I always said to myself, as I kind of create the arc of living out my Cabernet lifestyle and living out, my education of Cabernet and, the freedom that Andy Smith gave me as just the only person who worked in the cellar for 10 years, and taking over the winemaking in 2012, it allowed me to have these two parallel lives. But I always wanted to make sure Massican was small enough that it didn't interfere with. I never wanted to go into harvest with the stress of having to sell wine. So Massican had to be small enough that by August, September, it was sold out, and then I could start focusing on making a little bit more Massican and then turn my attention to Cabernet. And that model kept working, and it was shocking how quickly I was able to grow Massican, still sell it out by the end of August, from 400 cases to 1,000 cases to 2,200 cases. And it was like, oh shit, there's something here. So fast forward to, the pandemic times, and I was like, every 5 years, I wrote a business plan for Massican. I said, all right, here's the next business plan. And this is the 5-year model. And there are two options at the end of 5 years. One is to quit my day job, or to sell it to another company to support growth. And the number was kind of the same, in the business plan when I was looking at it. And I was just really fascinated by the idea of if this thing was going to work, and I noticed how it was selling, if it was going to work, it needed scale, and it needed to be a wholesale brand. Whereas my 15 years at Larkmead, from 2006, 2007, all the way up to 2021, we were a direct-to-consumer brand. We were a hospitality brand. We were a restaurant. We opened the doors. We let people in at a set time. We sat them down. We gave them wine. We gave them not so much food, but crackers. We were we were an agricultural company. We were a manufacturing company. We were a complete and utter, like, from the bottom to the top of the ladder, full chain of consumer packaged good sales marketing network. And that was what all of Napa, a lot of Napa and Sonoma structures their business, if you're an estate model or if you have a physical winery and hospitality space. And that was but I learned so much of that. And I learned the consumer who wanted that in their life, as opposed to the consumer who wanted Massican in their life. The consumer who wanted Massican in their life is a group of people who are really close to the brand, who have had an Italian or a Mediterranean experience, have had, the same kind of experiences I have had, and connect on this idea that I try to put forth with Massican as this kind of this thing that doesn't exist, this virtual winery, that imagination is better than the real thing, romance and nostalgia are better than the real thing. And Massican is that, I always stole in my own mind the idea of the advertising campaign from a brand called Calgon. It was a bubble bath. These commercials on TV when I was younger, and it was like, Calgon, take me away. And so for me, it was always been, how does Massican take you somewhere? Right. Where do you want to drink a glass of white wine? And so I got to experience this amazing kind of infrastructure of an estate winery at Larkmead, but at the same time, I got to create a vision for something that doesn't exist, but people want to be a part of it. And that's where it finally got to a point where those two roads diverged, and I knew that Massican could be bigger than it actually is.
And I think that's so cool that, like, you're willing to kind of look at the step and understand maybe the purpose or what you hope to accomplish with it, and be willing to, like, move into the future with it and not be scared or not take on too much and not be able to handle it, and kind of, drop maybe quality, not necessarily quality, but just not being able to keep up with things. You have a quote on one of the articles I was reading online that I really loved, and I think it ties into what you're saying. And it's, when I think about Massican, I don't think about how old you are. I think about what your other options are. And you were kind of elaborating on generational accessibility and this mindset of, like, making wine approachable for people from, different walks of life and from different, financial economies maybe. And I thought that was so cool when I read that, because, it's interesting to see, like you were saying, that you had these two different worlds, and that, you were able to balance them for as long as you did. And I think that's great. And I think maybe this is a good time for us to kind of talk about the acquisition of Massican and however much you're willing to share, and kind of tell us, like, what the future now looks like. If you've written another, I guess it's only been it's been about 5 years since 21, but yeah, it hasn't been that long. And will you be writing the next 5-year business plan?
Well, thankfully, my role has changed with Massican, but it is a big part of my role is the direction, is the creative direction of Massican. I love the idea of being a creative director with the ability to work with vineyard owners and grape growers, and then also manage the production and make the wines. Like, I get to do that while at the same time, be a spokesperson, storyteller, creative force behind the brand. And I think that's something that it was kind of a deal breaker for me. It's like, I want to make sure that we hold true to the vision, but also evolve. And the beauty of the Gallo family, when we started talking, and Joe Gallo and I met over a Negroni and a martini at Don Giovanni's, and then over dinner at Bottega a few months later, he always said, "How can I help you? Like, what could we do to make your life and bring your vision to life?" So I always, jokingly say he gave me, the keys to the Ferrari, and it's like that relationship of help and awareness of like, the kid's got it right. He's figured it out. Let him go. Let him do it. Let's just provide the resources that he may or may not need for us to kind of take his vision to life. And I think the big thing, what I identified with the relationship with Gallo is that they are hands off in that process, and they are willing to, and they're willing to kind of like make the wine, make true on the statement, make these wines more accessible. And when I think about accessibility, I think about, if you see the wine somewhere, you can afford it. And Gallo is a champion in that genre, in that arena, and they believe in it. They believe in putting more wine on the table, and that to me is, that is exactly what I want Massican to be. Is I want more. If I'm going to make an impact, my final impact as a winemaker on my tombstone, it has to say something to the extent of, California's great white wines. And how do I get to that point at 7,000 cases or 10,000 cases? You're too niche to be that. We're not white Burgundy here, where, and we're not 150 years or, generational experience to say, okay, these are the great white wineries of the world that only make, 1,000 cases of wine. But
nobody's ever had them, but I hear they're really great.
Yeah, exactly. And, the only people that know that they're great are the people within the industry. I mean, to touch someone's true life, as I say, no one wakes up thinking about wine in the morning, but what if I can have people wake up and thinking about Massican, because Massican's beyond wine. It's a vision of a world that you want to live in that includes wine, and it's a romantic ideal. It's all, and the beauty of my relationship with Gallo is they've never stopped me from continuing that future vision, but they've just given me more gas to fuel the tank. And it's just been such a joyous year and a half of working with the team and getting to know people, and kind of conscripting what this is going to potentially look like. And this year is our trial year to kind of do some events in marketplace and kind of take over a role as, this is, white wine is having a moment. I think everyone knows that, and we're seeing it in the numbers. It's having a moment. But how does Massican, through the network of the Gallo team, kind of take advantage of that moment and become the winery that owns that movement? There are wineries that own the Chardonnay category in America that we know of, from California, the Rombauers of the world and the KJs of the world. But from a white wine perspective, we want to broaden white wine beyond the Chardonnay category, and I think Massican's doing it. So, and we're gonna have some fun in the next couple of years. I think we have, we're kind of baselining ourselves on a 10-year plan with, see how we're doing in 5 years, and then go from there. But the numbers aren't huge to make a true impact. So I'm excited about it. I couldn't be, I wouldn't be here today. I would have, I'd be grinding it out harder if it wasn't for the Gallo family and their true belief in what we've done with Massican and what we can continue to do, which is just, I think it's potentially unstoppable.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. I think you touched on a few points that are really great. And first of all, congratulations in this sense, right? Because you got this to the point where you were able to evolve it into the next phase. And a couple of the things that you were touching on, one being that, their belief in the farmers and their belief in what they're doing. I used to work with Gallo. I was with Glazers and then Southern Glazers after the merger in Texas. And we sold Gallo. And, back then even, a lot of people that are maybe quite form their opinions a little too early, go like, oh, Gallo. Like, okay, but we're talking about the Lux portfolio. We're talking about Allegrini. Like, a lot of these wineries are all still family owned and operated, and maybe Gallo's importing them, or we're talking about, a lot of other small people. And other people have done things like this, Randall Graham, and Dave Feeney, for that example, also with Gallo, staying on and making the wines for Orange Swift after selling the Prisoner brand to Constellation, and then and Orange Swift to Gallo. And then, he also got like the keys to the castle in a way as well with the storybook. What was it? I can't remember. It was a blue label wine that he made for a few years when the partnership happened. But anyways, that aside. And then one of the other things that I think is important to highlight there is that, like, because it's not just Chardonnay, you're not just buying Chardonnay from big Chardonnay growers. You're able to support smaller farmers that are growing grapes that are harder to sell, that will then in turn ideally raise the value or the perceived value of those grapes and bring those grapes a little bit more to the forefront and help all of those smaller farmers. Somebody that one of the wines I almost brought was a Lang & Reed Chenin Blanc, right? John Scupney is an incredible person, and the fact that they chose to do Cabernet Franc and Chenin Blanc, I think, is not necessarily a fuck you to the industry, but it's like I'm not willing to just. I've said all the time, he could have just grown Cabernet Sauvignon and retired forever ago, right? But that's not where his passion lies, and I think that's the farmers that you were working with, and also like you also is like you're still going to do what you're doing, and I think that's really cool and it's beautiful, and I also like the fact that like we can say that Gallo is not the big bad guy. So many people think of these large companies as big bad guys. I mean, Axel Melisme owns Outpost and Domaine de Larlo, and then you have Artemis Domain owns Isley Vineyard, and you have all these big companies that are investing in these people, but they're investing in them to allow them to continue doing what they're doing. It's almost like a safety net that, like, God forbid something like 2020 happens again, and how many more people are we going to lose? How many of these farms are we going to lose? How many of these wineries are we going to lose? How many restaurants are we going to lose? So I mean, I'm excited about it. I think it's a pro in many ways, and hearing you explain it also allowed me that perspective.
We have to kind of thank the consumers.
Yeah,
consumers have put us here. The wine industry where it is today is many X multiple from what it was 40 years ago. Like, so the consumers who are drinking these products put us to this place where we are creating a lot more, and it's given us the freedom to be creative, and it's given us the freedom to want to start small projects and be entrepreneurial. But unfortunately, it's a very hard business. Going back to the model I mentioned earlier with Larkmead as an agricultural provider, a manufacturing provider, a hospitality professional, then working with third parties in a sales and marketing perspective, working direct to consumer in a sales and marketing perspective, having marketing departments, having all of this stuff and vendors and bottling, and it is not an easy task to put a glass of wine on the table, but the consumers wanted more of it for the last 40 years, and those numbers shown it. Now it's settling, all right? It's settling. It's settling to a place where maybe this is how much wine Americans want to drink, and that is completely fine, and we'll find our place in that. And the larger companies, I love the way you called it a safety net. The larger companies have come in and they've purchased the land that these grapes are grown, or the businesses, and they've given them the opportunity to continue to do great shit. And I think this is, there's just going to be a kind of a massaging of what it all looks like in 10 years from now. And I think Mother Nature has a big role to play in that as well. Unfortunately, we have to, we are an agricultural product, and Mother Nature is going to tell us what we can and can't do in the next 10 to 20, 30 years from a grape growing perspective. And we're ahead of it. I work on the board of the Napa Valley Grape Growers, on the team of Napa Green from a board perspective. So it's hard for me to watch what's going on in this world and not to project to the future when most farmers we're looking at a 10-day forecast. But it's exciting that people want to invest in these businesses, that people want to invest in human beings. You mentioned all the names earlier from Randall and Dave, and like that's a really cool thing, and we need to celebrate that more. And I think we get caught up with the competition of it all a lot. But I'm shit, I want to win, man.
Yeah.
I don't want to throw you off my wine list, but I'll tell you this. You mentioned John Scupney. When he started Lang & Reed in the late 90s, he is the longest running by the glass at Mustard's Restaurant in Napa Valley. I'm like, fuck, man, I want to be the longest running by the glass at a restaurant anywhere.
Yeah.
I look at that. I wake up every day thinking about John Scupney. I shouldn't, but I do because he has this, this track record of doing something unique and delicious over time, quality and consistency over time at a price people can afford.
Right.
And he's been doing it for over 25 years. And I think that is just, that is my aspiration and my inspiration on a daily basis as a wine professional.
I think that's awesome. Yeah, it's beautiful. And I think too, to touch back and then I'll let go of it, but to touch back on like this concept of like the big bad or like the evil entity, right? I think that with social media being the way that it is nowadays and with the access to information being what it is, I think a lot of people are still dealing with like the concept of like, and there's other people that have been on the podcast that have discussed like vineyards getting bought up and ripped up and planted to Cabernet Sauvignon and kind of this like monocropping happening, right? And I think that that's going to happen less and less because people are going to be thinking about their image. So even if there's this big company that's like managed by shareholders or managed by this company that's just all about profit, they now have to think about their legacy and they have to think about the decisions they're going to make and how that's going to impact their reputation. And if they come in and they buy Massican and they rip up all the vineyards you're working with and plant, Friulano only, right? People are going to go like, wow, we don't want to sell to them anymore. So it's a great way to kind of like honor the wineries and also like, I hope it brings a little bit of peace of mind to people kind of thinking about that because
no, you can shit on Napa Valley all you want. I do all the time at home at private dinner parties with my friends and family, but it's more out of love than it is out of hate because, but it has to exist, right? And the reason is simple. It's like if you look at everything as a pie chart and how the distribution of consumers are based on that pie chart, Napa Valley only produces 3.5% of the wine consumed in America. So they are at the end of the pie chart at that 1% of the 1% area. So if Napa Valley didn't exist, Dow wouldn't exist, right? A Cabernet from Paso Robles would not exist. But guess where Dow exists on that? It exists in the big bubble of the pie chart, but then it also exists on the fine wine side coming down that hill. And so I think Napa Valley has to exist in that sense. Just like luxury has to exist in product. You and I are wearing clothing today. I don't know what your financial budget is for clothing, but mine isn't luxurious when I'm paying, $800.
I'm only wearing these pants because my others had holes in them. But
yeah, I'm not paying $800 for a pair of jeans, but they exist in this world. So an $80 or an $8 pair of jeans on TikTok shop exists,
right.
So I think we have to, stop slinging arrows and kind of again celebrate the fact that Napa Valley and the Cabernet movement in California starting in the late 70s, early 80s was the thing that created the industry we have today. And the industry we have today is pretty dynamic and pretty delicious.
Yeah.
Although it's at times it's expensive. And that's why they're the $2 Chucks of the world and the Barefoots of the world and the Yellowtails of the world. Those exist and let people enjoy a glass of wine with alcohol in it, just like they would enjoy a Jack Daniels. I don't live in the liquor space, but like, are people just shitting on Jack Daniels every day the way we shit on low priced wines or overly manipulated wines or over expensive? I don't know. I mean, does that exist? Again, someone put it in the comments of here, like, show me where other industries are really bagging on people on a consistent basis because they think their product isn't good enough to as part of a dictionary definition of wine.
Yeah, you're right. There's this sense of elitism and that is challenging and off-putting, and I think it's this kind of cannibalization of our industry that's been happening that's just making things harder and harder. Everybody's talking about, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And it's like, well, first of all, we should all help each other. Let's all lift each other up. That's the whole point of the podcast. Like, we're not making money off this thing. It's because we believe in what we're doing and we believe in what all the people that are on here are doing. And we want to do everything that we can to help as many people as we can. And also to help people understand wine a little bit more and feel more comfortable about wine and see that, like, just a person, like with full transparency, I was nervous as fuck having you on here, right? And I was like, but after 15 minutes, I'm like, okay, I'm a little looser. I feel good. Like,
You're drinking low alcohol white wine.
That's true. Yeah, the wine helps. Wine after coffee, it's a good balance. I might have been over caffeinated.
It's like 10 in the morning, everybody.
Yeah,
Just FYI.
But that's what we do. That's I was like, all the people in this office are probably like, what are those guys doing drinking wine right now? Close the curtains. Cool. I want to touch on a couple other things, and these are all things that I think really stood out to me. And there's many things that stood out to me. So I'll try to not go too far down the rabbit hole. But to touch back on at the very beginning, I was talking about you pushing the envelope and you constantly like innovating and thinking about the future and what's going to change. I mean, tech in the marketplace, EFTs, blockchains, like these are all things that you've talked about before. And I think the article that I was reading was from 2022. And so do you want to elaborate on that? I know you were talking about like a meta bar and you were talking about things like that.
Yeah. So. Yes, it's funny. I don't post that often on Thread, but I think, recently with all the Meta changes and Instagram changes and we're sitting here in San Francisco and Mark Zuckerberg's desire to have a Metaverse. I was like, wow, we should have just let him create his Metaverse and like focus on that instead of all the other stuff. Instead of destroying the algorithm, so it's making the program that used to be an incredible lookbook into something that I don't even know what it is anymore. Yeah. But sorry, anyone who works at Facebook Meta, love you. I know a lot of you are on my mailing list. But
my wine.
No, I just we all sat there during. Look, Zoom was a product that existed pre-pandemic, and Microsoft Teams and all these visual meeting platforms that existed, and everyone used them. It was actually used a lot by sales teams. Like if you mentioned Southern Glazers in Texas. I mean, you have reps all over the state. It's not easy to bring them all together.
It's not possible.
You just put them up on a Zoom meeting, and everyone's talking to each other on a Friday morning. And so these things existed even within our industry prior to the pandemic. But what I started realizing was like, can we get out of that space? How do we take our avatars, which are these talking heads on a box in Zoom, and how do we put them into a place like Bar Massican? How do we Calgon take me away? When I get home at night and everything else, and I'm looking for that 10-minute escapism. What is it? Can I go into a place with a glass of wine and just almost like, as the Hollywood calls it, laid back entertainment, put myself into this bar in the metaverse where it's open 365 days a year, 7/24, doesn't have a race, religion, or creed, speaks multiple languages, and I can just escape to a place like Bar Massican, an Italian bar, in a virtual space. There's a gaming industry, right? There's 70 million unique users per day playing Roblox, but they happen to be in the ages between 9 and 18. When they become adults, how is that 70 million unique users a day going to live their lives? Are they going to live it in a virtual space? Are they going to live it in a gaming space? Are they going to live it in an office space? Because we all have to go back to work now. So I was thinking about how we're going to communicate and talk to the next generation. And for me, that was just a simple way to kind of, take me out of that Brady Bunch kind of Hollywood Squares box. I mean, the younger generation listening to this probably have no idea what I'm talking about. And allow you and me to walk into Bar Massican, have this exact same conversation, drink this exact same glass of wine, but do it in a cafe setting. Right. And that feels like you're in Milan or outside of Italy in Paris or London or in New York City. So that was my dream vision of creating this world around that we can escape to. But it was also just it was software on the blockchain that would allow us to enter, like you're clicking to enter into Zoom or to Google Meet or to Microsoft Teams. So that was that vision, and I was going to offer it to my mailing list as like a place to do Zoom meetings. Yeah. So hey, you have access. Here's the private link. No one else has access to this. So that was what I was doing there. NFTs are just it's a ledger. Right. The blockchain is ledger based. So we can to think of it this way, if I I sourced a vineyard site, and I put that vineyard site as my first NFT. In that NFT, I can continue to grow an entire vineyard and then pick the grapes and record all the information on a daily basis, from weather to integration and to whatever we do, involvement and touching of the vineyard, to the day we harvest it, to the day it gets fermented. And then the fermentary process, I can record all the information from fermentation temperatures, if there was any yeast or nitrogen added, or any after fermentation, any sulfur added, bottling activity, and then from bottling activity, I can get the information about the cork, and that could be in there, so that over the course of time, this glass of wine has everything recorded to it. So it's almost like this one product has a biblical past and provenance that can be accessible to everybody at all times. You just need a good user interface. That's the worst part of the blockchain right now, is that the user interface of like Etherscan is terrible. For a consumer, for the high tech nerd in the world, it's probably amazing. But for me, it's terrible. But I just loved that idea. And so that was kind of what I was thinking there. And I was also looking at the idea that, people trust us to buy wine from our website, and then if it's hot weather, I can't ship it, so I have to ship it in October, because I can't ship it. You buy it in June, and it's too hot to ship to Texas until October, November. So they give us money, and they get nothing in return, because Mother Nature says, I can't ship you this wine because it's perishable. So I started making NFTs, and I said, hey, look, thank you. Here's a digital collectible that represents Massican, and we want to give it to you as a thank you. Mm-hmm. And because you're not going to get your wine for maybe 6 days or maybe even 60 days, because of Mother Nature, I'm waiting to the weather to turn. So I just felt like people trusted us, and I just wanted to give them something in return. So I used the NFT movement as a means to do that, and to create a world, a wallet, a place that people can experience Massican. And then also at that point in time, if you never heard of NFTs, and also you got a Massican NFT, and then you're at a dinner with a corporate dinner somewhere, or your clients, and they're talking about the blockchain and NFTs, now like, holy shit, I own a fucking NFT.
Yeah.
I got this Massican NFT, and let me show it to you, and let me tell you what Massican is. So I just kind of wanted, again, meeting people where they are, and there's not a lot of people in the wine space that are crypto forward or blockchain forward. I knew that, and but I didn't have the time to go outside of the space to kind of really introduce it into the tech world. But it's all coming. This whole idea of the ledger is coming, and I think it's amazing because, from the housing marketplace and titles and entitlements and all the other and deeds and to when you get recalled on a car, like every nut, bolt, ball bearing in a car will be recorded. Yeah. And I think that's going to be super efficient to the world. Mm-hmm. It's just going to take time. A lot of it pre-exists already, from credit cards to barcode scanners, all that stuff. A lot of it exists. It just needs to get to a place where it all speaks to each other. And I think the blockchain is that space, and that's probably going to be 20, 30 years out.
No, that was so cool. That was so fascinating. Even my mind's spinning a little bit from it all, because there's just so much great information. And as a wine guy, I'm not usually a tech guy. And, Bianca does basically everything else besides the talking. That's me. And I think that's really fascinating. That was one of the things that I thought was really cool, is, creating this blockchain for this vineyard, for this wine. I think is so fascinating, because I've always been fascinated, I guess, in the Where's George dollar bills, where you'll see where the dollar bill ended up all across the country, or, Biacart Simone has added like a My Origin to the back of the bottle, and it's not bottle specific, but it's, disgorgement specific. And I mean, the more information, the better, right? People are going to want that. People are going to want to see that. And, I think that it'll be really cool when that starts happening with the blue chip wines, and you're able to maybe track counterfeits a little bit more, or try to track counterfeits a little bit more. I think that's going to be massive. We were talking about counterfeit wine this morning, actually, and last night it was kind of a continuation of the conversation, and it was like, how do you know?
Back in pandemic times when the blockchain was happening, someone who worked in the industry, who happened to be a really intense wine collector, he told me, he goes, look, I'm going to buy XYZ, single vineyard, Grand Cru Rouleau, and I'm going to buy it, but then I'm going to just sell it at auction in a couple of years, And he's like, so why do I need that wine to go from France, to maybe to Livorno and then to the ports of New Jersey, and then from New Jersey to a retail, and then from a retailer to around the country to the ports of Oakland, and then into a shop, and then into my cellar, and then me ship it to Chicago to HDH. He's like, I don't need to move that wine.
Yeah.
I know I'm buying this for sale and a DRC or whatever it is. And he goes, I just need to own the title to it, which is that non-fungible token that I can then sell, and then it goes into someone else's hands, and then they can ship the fucking wine around the world if they want to.
Right.
But for me, I don't need to do that. So that gets to this point of like the blue chip, and I think a lot of the blue chip wines of the world just move around the world and sit somewhere until, unfortunately, someone passes away or they get divorced and they have to sell all the shit at Hong Kong, Christie's auction or Sotheby's. So,
or Acker.
Or Acker.
That's the one we look at a lot.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of ways to skin the cat, and all this stuff is happening right now. It's not happening under this quote unquote kind of universal ledger system that was that we believe the blockchain. We who believe in the blockchain technology could exist one day.
It's dizzying to think about the future in that sense.
That might be 5 years from now might be where I end up after my wine career, after I've accomplished my goals in wine.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess that was a great look into the future. Let's maybe take a step back into the past and also kind of a projection of the future as well. Is one of the things that I thought was fascinating is that you're working with mostly only esoteric grapes. There's been, I think I saw a Chardonnay online. I'm sure you've made some other things that God forbid I could find it somewhere, right? But is there any interest in making red, and what was kind of the deciding factor to not make red? A lot of people, let's say Scupney, for example, will choose 2 grapes so that way there's not, thousands of SKUs or so many different things happening. But your SKU count for your whites is incredible. Why no red, I guess is the question.
Well, I love that we're talking about John Scupney because he is a business school case study of like doing one thing and doing it well and focusing on Cabernet Franc, and he's consistently over time doing it. And as with Massican, what I've been trying to kind of create the imagination around what Massican is it's just white wines. Mediterranean style white wines made in California. They smell like flowers of the Mediterranean. They smell like fruits of the Mediterranean, the citruses. They smell like the sea of the Mediterranean. And that to me is whether it's an Ania, which is a Tokai Friulano Ribolla Gialla blend, or a Gemina, which is a Greco Falangina blend, or if it's Pinot Grigio, which is Pinot Grigio Cortese, if it's our Sauvignon Blanc, or even our Chardonnay from Hyde Vineyard. All of those are going to have this stylistic trait to it that I want people to understand as, that's Massican. Where people, if, my biggest goal in this life, if it's possible, I don't think I have I don't have the longevity to do it, just because it takes a lot of time. But to look at a place like Google, where now Google has become this, this verb, right? And we started using words that are products that actually identify an action. So for me, it's like, when does Massican become the kind of default title for someone to say, I want a glass of white wine? I want something like Massican. Do you have something like Massican? And that to me is like, that's ultimate success. I mean, I don't think we'll achieve that. I just think it's incredible because we don't talk about it that way in wine. Like unless someone's in the market, at a bar and saying, I want something like Santa Margarita or Rombauer or something like that. I don't know. But that's where, like, I think, a glass of red wine, a glass of white wine, I want a Pinot Grigio, I want a Chardonnay, I want a Rosé. Like, there's no brands. These are just overarching categories. And for me, like, getting Massican up to that overarching categorical level as a white wine is important. But the reality of not making red wine. So I don't think of my 10 grape varieties as being like SKU intensive.
Sure.
I think of it as it's one idea and it tastes different in each bottle. And you can trust that if you love the idea, you can drink any one of them without feeling like, oh shit, it's, yeah, you might like this one because of its crispy, crunchy characteristic versus this one because of its viscous characteristic, but they still have the same flavor profile. They still have the same sound, audible, visual, taste, sensation that you would get with your favorite band, right? And that's how I think of Massican. And so I don't find anything in the category of red wines that would play well with Massican. And, for 15 years, people were like, why don't you make a red wine? I'm like, I make fucking lark meat. I had to tell my wife that every night. I'm like, she's like, why don't you make a red wine? Because I make lark meat. It's my red wines. That's my stake in the ground there. But I don't really see what grape variety would give me the red wine energy that I get when I drink a glass of Massican.
Yeah.
Could you say something from Sicily, Etna-esque, maybe? It's harder to do that in the south of Italy.
I was thinking like Cerasuolo, but how the fuck are you going to grow that here?
You start thinking of the red wine grapes of Campania, and it's just, those are big and powerful, and that's not Massican.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it comes out and we sit down and we have a need for it, a want for it. If consumers are asking for it, I would probably be under a brother or sister brand.
Sure.
That is adjacent, that's lockstep, but it won't carry a Massican label.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense.
I don't know. You hate to say never, but I will tell you this: there is nothing in the pipeline right now, and it's something I've been dealing with for 15 years.
Yeah.
And I always still love to answer the question because it gets me to focus my thoughts around as to why I'm not doing it.
Right. Yeah. I love that. I mean, sorry to make you hammer the anvil one more time, but
you're not going to be the last one, trust me.
And then for, fans, I guess we should have asked this earlier. The name Massican, where does it come from? What does it mean? Because if we're going to be using it as a verb in 10 years, 20 years, I want to make sure that I'm using it right.
Yeah, no, it's a mountain range in southern Italy where my great-grandparents were born. So Anya is my mother, their granddaughter. And so that was the only wine I wanted to make, was this southern Italian kind of vision of a wine brand. And it is the Monte Massico, the Massican Hills, just north of Naples in Campania. And but it's funny that the wine is actually Friulian inspired, or Friuli inspired, and with the grapes that I chose for that particular wine. And then Gemina, which is ancient Roman grape Greco. Is a Greco blend, so it's more tied to the origin story of my family in the South, my mother's side family. So that's really fun. Like I love telling the Gemina story as much as I love the Friuli story. Like I probably, because we started our brand with Anya and Tokai Ribolla Chardonnay as a blend, and the famous Ribolla Gialla vineyard at Vere in Oak Knoll, with great history from, Abe Schoner, John Consgard, Steve Mathiasen, Arno Roberts, Rhyme, myself, etc. I think there's such a great story there. But I've kind of been, Massican has always been tied back to Friuli, and I love that. I mean, personally, to this day, I have friends there that I kind of communicate on a regular basis. I went and I made wine there for 5 years, and I was there 4 or 5 times a year. So Friuli holds a very special place in my heart, and the wines of that community are just they're stunning. So, but Massican is trying to kind of blur some lines. I don't want. The goal of a terroir or estate winemaker is to present a sense of place in their wine. Massican is a vision and not a sense of place.
A passport.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. Ooh, where's my notebook?
Yeah, I think that's really cool. I think that's so fascinating, and I have a lot of respect for that. I mean, it's great to see, and I love the way that you think outside the box, and the way that you're kind of like angling the product, right? It's not like you're not shooting for the 1%. You're shooting for kind of like the daily people, right? It'd be my dream if I went. My grandma lives in 29 Palms, right on the border of Joshua Tree and 29 Palms, and we go down there sometimes, and we go to the grocery store, and we don't even go look at the shelf. Right. And it's not for, any reason in particular, but, Vaughn's is and every now and then I go, wow, I didn't know this was here. I didn't know this was here. And I get excited. And so it'd be really cool for the idea, like go down there, grab a bottle of Massican off the shelf and be able to take it and share it with my family. I think that's awesome.
It'll get there. It takes time.
Yeah.
We have a lot of grape varieties. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of those grape varieties planted in the state of California.
Right.
So we are, we're gobbling up whatever comes available to us over time, and then we will consider putting more vines in the ground that support what we're doing. But for us right now, it's a slow growth process, and that's what I really enjoyed about being so in tune with the Gallo family on how we wanted to work together. It's just it feels like they were there from day one. Like that's how kind of like the bond has been with with our future potential. Yeah, but they act slow. They act in 10-year increments. Which I'm like, come on, let's go. Right. Let's get on the fucking blockchain. Let's do this.
So you touched on something that was kind of the next step of what I wanted to ask, and that was the future of these vineyards and also kind of the expanding or contracting of these vineyards. Right? You mentioned Dow earlier, who was a winery that in particular bought an old Halianico vineyard, tore it out, planted Cabernet Sauvignon. And, for better or for worse, right? Like maybe these people didn't want to be involved in it anymore. The farmer passed away. The kids don't want to be involved in it. At least there's still grapes. At least there's still wine being made, right? Are you finding it harder and harder over the time that you've been with Massican and you've been buying these grapes to find these grapes? Or do you feel like there's more coming up? Do you feel like it just is very region dependent? How is that search going?
I think right now in the climate changing world, think about agriculture from grape growing perspective as an hourglass. 100 years ago, the top of the hourglass was full of many, many, many grape varieties because the region of California as a grape growing place was being infiltrated by immigrants. I'm happy to say that word, from France and Spain and from Germany and from Italy, and they were bringing what they knew with them. And there was 20, 30, 40, 50 grapes planted at Larkmead pre-prohibition. And then you get down to, the center of the hourglass, and you start to see we focus on what consumers tell us they want to drink. And that was a period of time. That was a multi-decade period of time where people wanted to drink Cabernet Sauvignon. And so we went from 20, I think it was like at one point, 28 grape varieties at Larkmead to 7. And then now with the focus on what's going to work in a climate changing world, you're going to see grape, at the bottom of the hourglass, it's going to start to open up. You're going to see more diversity because I think people are going to be more comfortable working with flavor profiles that they weren't necessarily familiar with, but now are apparent in a climate changing world that will be consumer friendly. And I think about this, when we think about this with like Tempranillo and how Tempranillo, one of the greatest wines in the world, Vega Sicilia, is Tempranillo based. It's 90% Tempranillo, 10% Cabernet Sauvignon. And I think about if Bob Mondavi was born, or Bob Mondavi started a winery in 2024, 2025 in Napa Valley, in the heart of it, would he plant Cabernet or would he plant Tempranillo? Because in 2025, he would have had Vega Sicilia. Did Bob, on his trips to Europe? No, maybe he had Vega Sicilia, maybe he didn't. I don't know. But he didn't have it enough to say, holy shit, we're not doing a partnership with the Rothschild family. We're going to do a partnership with this cool fucking Spanish family that has a really incredible wine growing
Who also does
history.
a relationship with the Rothschild family.
Yeah,
right?
has a really cool wine growing history, and the same thing with Grange, right? Bob Mondavi and Grange were coming up in different parts of the world at the same time, but maybe Bob didn't know that this existed. And if he did, I mean, like Grange is no shade to the wines of the Mondavis, but they don't live in the top 10 great wines of the world,
right?
Where Grange does, Vega Sicilia does, and those are two wines that are going to live through this epic change of climate, especially in Napa Valley, I believe. So,
and the change in consumer preference,
yeah. And those wines also sell for higher price than Napa Valley wines. So if we're going to be this luxury niche marketplace, we can adapt. We can continue to change and evolve our story to being, we are the greatest wine grape growers in the world, but it doesn't have to be Cabernet. So I think we're going to see this. We're at that inflection point where the sand in the hourglass is coming down, and now it's going to be spreading out over the next 20 or 30 years, and you're going to see a lot more diversity in California wine growing. It'll feel like it was in like the 1890s through, even through Prohibition.
That visual of an hourglass is such a cool way to put it. I think that's so fascinating to think about it that way. And it's I mean, I don't know if I could relate it to this, but it also, in my mind, it links along to what's happening in Italy, right? It's a lot of the Italian wine regions are dusting off some of the old indigenous varieties, and they're starting to grow them again. And whether that's because of global warming or whether it's because of the change in consumer preference or whatever it is, I'm excited about it, and hopefully it's not an ever existing hourglass where we're just going to see this happen again and again. But I hope to be alive long enough to see it happen or not happen, I guess.
Italy's amazing for its diversity, but it's also, if you think of the size of Italy, I think it's like the size of Arizona on a square mile basis or something, how much diversity it has from the Northeast and Alto Adige, Friuli region and the cold and wet characteristic to the south, where you get this kind of hot and dry characteristic, and it is just stunning how they've so regionalized themselves. And this is, you had Brian on this podcast too, who's doing incredible work in Italian grape varieties down in Paso, and Brian Tedizzi. So, like, I personally just don't think having red grape varieties could make it in America or anywhere in the world, not just America. And it's just the simple fact that Sangiovese is not grown in Piedmont and Nebbiolo is not grown in Tuscany.
Right.
And they're a lot closer to each other.
Yeah.
And they're a lot more culturally connected to each other. I'm like, how do we think we can take this grape that, their neighboring, a neighboring region throughout Italy can do it somewhere else in the world. Whereas you see white grapes in Italy kind of go from different places, from the south, from Sicily all the way up to the north. And
all the different Grecos that aren't related to each other.
Yes, and the Vermentinos of the world and so forth. And those kind of even get into the Mediterranean side of southern France, and so you start to see that white grapes have a little bit more nobility with regards to its ability to transport themselves to other places, and red grapes are harder, man, and that's the beauty in it, and God bless everyone who's trying, but there's only like 5 or 6 red grapes in the world that can travel and be phenomenally successful from a qualitative flavor profile that people adore and love. And then there is 1,000 red grapes that I think should never leave their homeland.
Sure. Yeah.
Personally. I mean, that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah.
Too much wine to drink.
Yeah. Well, I also think that it's kind of important to point out, like, within what you said, it would be silly for anybody to say, like, I'm going to be the new Brunello in California. That's silly, right? Could you make
we have people saying they want to be the new Super Tuscan.
Yeah.
I love the idea. I love the ambition. I love the concept. I love the association.
Sure.
It's very Hollywood to say, oh, Die Hard is, it's the Christmas, Christmas kind of thriller caper, whatever. It's like it's the elevator pitch, right? Of the brand.
Yeah. But it's still apples and oranges.
Yes,
it's fruit, but it's apples and oranges. Yeah.
Massican is not. Even though I make Tokai Friulano and Ribolla Gialla in California, it is not Friulian.
Right.
It's inspired by Friuli wines. It uses Friulian grapes. But if you actually taste, when I did make wine in Friuli, if you tasted the two wines side by side from the same calendar year vintage, they were night and day.
Yeah.
And it was a great education for myself, my peers, my consumers to have that experience, because alone by itself, this wine, everyone who drinks, this is a compliment. Everyone who drinks Stony Hill from the glory days on its own with your partner, it is one of the great expressions of Chardonnay, and you immediately want to associate it with Chablis. But then you actually have a Chablis, and you're like, "Fuck!" It's like Stony Hill is nothing like Chablis. And it's like, but I'm not. It's still a compliment. You know what I mean? But it's like in its vacuum of that time and place of consumption, that terroir of consumption, we are inspired to believe that these wines are like those because that's how we inspired to make them. But they are. The beauty of it is they're different.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. It's back to that idea of like focusing on what you're doing and just doing what you do well, right? Instead of being worried about what's happening with somebody else and, you can't transport their soil, you can't transport the mountain ranges, you can't transport the Mediterranean, like you can't touch that stuff. So instead of focusing on all of that, just focus on what you can do and what you can do really well, which I think is really cool. I had 2 more quick things, and we can
go for it.
nutshell it, or you can elaborate as much as you want. A question that I'm going to start trying to ask a little bit more that, I'm trying to get a little bit better in season 3 is, what is a day in the life of Dan Petroski look like? We know that you wake up thinking about wine, as do I. And we know that when you get home at the end of the day, you're in the Metaverse at your bar Massican.
Yeah, baby. No, it's actually, I feel really fortunate. I haven't really changed my mindset in the 20 years I've been in wine. With the advent of social media, I'm a huge TikTok fan. I'm a huge Instagram fan. I've always a Pinterest fan. I'm a huge voyeur. And what I do is I love that kind of early morning hour when I can scroll the social media landscape of people I like and people I follow and be inspired because of their creativity. And so my life is about, the creativity. And today I might tell you a great idea, but tomorrow I will have a new great idea, or I'll have that great idea will have evolution overnight because I don't stop on that one point. I just keep moving. And what happens every morning, a day in a life, I wake up, I do my kind of, my hour plus social media scan of the entire internets, including news and so forth, until I'm sufficiently embarrassed because I wasn't creative enough to do something as spectacular as this incredible cat meme. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So I'm like, fuck, get up and get to work. Do better today than you did yesterday. And that's literally how I wake up every day.
Yeah.
And that mindset has driven me to do all the fun things I've been doing, the crazy things I've been doing. But then I have the opportunity to go to vineyards, to go to the winery, to make wine. The beauty of making white wine only is it's a very, the construction of a bottle of white wine is very short time frame. It doesn't start until, when the vineyard wakes up with bud break, and then really doesn't start till when you get fruit set, and it really doesn't start till the harvest period, and then the élevage period and the bottling period. And that's a very small window. So I have a lot of other free time to be here in San Francisco, hanging out and building relationships with buyers and with sales, my sales team, spending time on the internet. I do all the emails if anyone who's listening to this who knows this, I answer all the emails, I DM everybody, I respond to everything. It is, it doesn't take a lot of effort to spend 2 or 3 minutes, responding to an email that someone who signs up your someone came and found your website, clicked through the fucking 21 and over, prompt, and still sign up for the website and interested in the wines. Takes 2 minutes to say thank you and appreciate that bond, and that's been something I've been doing every day. So I spend a lot of time, probably spend an hour a day, communicating directly with consumers or buyers. I get a lot of, just yesterday, I got 3 emails asking about tech information and details about the wines. No matter where you put it, whether it's in 750 or if it's on your website or it's in social media, people still reach out because it's the natural inclination to be like, I'm not going to go 4, 5, 6 click deep through the crazy stimulus of this world. Boom, email, DM Dan, text Dan, whatever. And that's a big part of my life. So communicating on a regular basis, inspiration, communicating, coming up with ideas, still managing the day-to-day winemaking, vineyard activity, with grower relations. And then now it's that quiet period, December, January, when the wine's just resting. But starting on February 6th, I'll be going for 4 straight weeks. We're racking, blending, bottling in one winemaking facility, doing the Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Grigio. And then once that's bottled, last one, boom, next, get to the next winemaking facility, rack, blend, bottle, Ania, Jimina, and High Chardonnay. And then once that's in the pipe or in the bottle under cork, I hit the road, start selling wine.
Busy.
Yeah. It's fun. I'm fortunate. I'm very fortunate.
I think it's really cool that you brought up that shortened growing period and that shortened élevage period, because that's really fascinating to think about. Is like you do just kind of naturally have a little bit more time, right? It's not like you're having to barrel sample every week. It's not like you're having to just continuously be in there. Once you're out of tank or once you're out of barrel, you're kind of good for the
Yeah.
most part, obviously.
No, I mean, I blend the Massican wines in November, the first week of November after harvest, and then I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, this is what it looks like. We just need to make sure that the wines are topped, they're sulfured at the right level, they're, just going to, kind of evolve. Whereas, like, if you're making Napa Valley Cabernet and it's in barrel for 18 to 24 months, I got peers and friends of mine who are blending those wines over and over and over and over again to make sure they get it right, because it's really important to, their brand and their kind of self-confidence and their critical acclaim to get it right.
Nail that style.
And so it's a long, making a red wine with age like Cabernet, I'm using that as an example because it is the, kind of the longest aging American wine, from a wine production perspective. It's you got to work on it, man. And it's an evolution of a process. And there's a lot, unfortunately, because of Napa Valley Cabernet, there's a lot weighing on the final outcome of those wines. You get a bad score. Hate to say this out loud. They still matter. Scores matter to retail. Scores matter to the self-confidence and the matter to the owners of these wine brands to show that they have peer acceptance and peer review. And it's really important to, to do well. We're all competitive. Right? We've all done this from grammar school to high school to college. We've all managed our lives against benchmarks of excellence or some sort of excellence.
And scores matter to consumer, which at the end of the day, like, that's the final product, right? Unless, again, you're the blue chip and you're bouncing around the country unopened, like we were discussing.
No, think of it like school. You have a year to make a wine, and what grade did you get on it?
Oh, yeah.
It was a B vintage, but you made a B plus wine. Fucking A, man.
Yeah. That's funny. That's a good way to think of it. Well, you've had a chance to taste the wine a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think?
We are not drinking Massican, by the
It's,
way.
I always say that if I'm presenting a wine blind in the podcast, it's not necessarily a blindable wine. It's always just like a wine. It's important, I think, to have a wine on the table that we're not only talking about the wine. It's easy as a professional to like have a glass, talk about the glass, talk about every other wine you've ever had like that, and then tangent, wine. I like to talk about, people who get to know each other. So, do you like it?
No, I love it. I mean, that's
the important question.
No, for me, Massican, I always say it's, these lighter wines, these fresher wines. They're these citrusy wines, floral wines. They are, and in this particular wine, I love it. It's got all of that kind of those kind of florals and citruses on the nose. The viscosity of this doesn't have a lot of acid. It's got really beautiful texture on the palate. Feels incredible. It doesn't feel New World to me, but maybe it's inspired by New World producer inspired by old. It feels like it's Mediterranean grape varieties, white grape varieties. It's got this beautiful green hue to it. I really enjoyed this wine, especially at, now it's 11 a.m. Kind of wet my whistle.
It's a good post-coffee wine.
Yeah. No, I had my coffee and my white wine, but it's delicious. Good. Yeah, I love it.
This is we always kind of vacillate on like, what do we want to open for somebody? Like, what are we going to show them? Right? Like, do I really want to show him a Italian grape? A white Italian grape, if that's what he does, right? Yeah. And I was thinking about opening some. I almost grabbed a bottle of Massimo Alois's wine. There's a Pellegrino Casavecchia blend, but I was also like, I don't know that I want to drink red first thing in the morning. So I was just like, well, we'll split the difference. Yeah. I don't know if you've had any of the wines from Crues before, but
no,
they're in Russian River, and this is their Fiano.
Wow,
it comes from the Bolin Vineyard in Russian River Valley.
Oh yeah.
And
I work with that vineyard. Oh my God, yeah.
It's like a half an acre. It's so small.
It's tiny.
And I didn't see a Fiano on the website, so I was also like not worried about kind of cross-promoting, but they make like 1,500 cases in total, and I thought it would be cool for you to see something in your hood.
That's great. Yeah. No, for sure. It's interesting. It's got that green hue that I'm looking at is also what I see a lot in my Italian grape varieties coming from Carneros with these on the Sonoma side, and also in Russian River with this really beautiful rich soils. I know of these wines. It's the first time I've ever had it. Thank you very much.
Of course,
I added Fiano to the mix with Gemina 2023 vintage.
Right.
So you'll see that in there. Chris Bowen is the crazy farmer who, in Sonoma County, who's planted Ribolla, Tokai, Pinot Grigio for me. He has Fiano Greco for me as well. So I basically buy 95% of the fruit from that vineyard. And it's the backbone of a lot of Massican. And this is really wonderful. It's a 2021 vintage, which is quietly warmer vintage, but structured vintage. It didn't have a lot of acidity, as I mentioned, but it had really great kind of viscosity and texture. Beautiful wine.
Yeah.
I love it. Thanks for sharing.
Happy to share, of course, yeah. And then as we kind of wrap things up, I always like to give a chance for people to say what's on their mind or make a statement, give advice. Is there anything that you can be multiple things too, but is there anything in particular that you want to share that we haven't touched on, or anything in particular you want to share with the listeners or viewers?
No, I think my only New Year's resolution that I haven't kind of followed up on, now we're 23 days into the new year, is I wanted 2025 to be a year of Syrah for me. I wanted to drink a lot of Syrah. I haven't done that yet. So, and I'm here in San Francisco. I'm going to a Bordeaux tasting. My tasting group just did two sessions of Bordeaux in the last 2 months. So I'm super excited to kind of taste some more Bordeaux today. I love Bordeaux, the city. I hope to get there. Nothing on my mind that's other than just like my own personal drinking goals. And again, I just think that wine is inspiring, and the stories behind it's inspiring, and everyone out there who touches wine, just feel good about it and just bring joy to your life and the people around you by sharing.
Perfect. Well, thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for, helping wine be more fun.
Awesome. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Cheers, Dan.
Cheers.